Before we continue, I want to share something with you. I put a lot of time and effort into creating these stories, and your support genuinely helps me keep making them. If you enjoy my stories and want to support the channel, you can join me on Patreon, where I share exclusive stories and content. The appointment slip trembled in my hands as I stood at the marble reception desk, trying to steady my breathing. The private hospital's lobby gleamed with polished surfaces and expensive art, making my worn jacket and scuffed shoes feel even more out of place. At 7 months pregnant, every step had been exhausting, but I'd saved for weeks to afford this consultation. "Next," called the nurse behind the counter, her voice crisp and professional until she looked up at me. Her expression shifted immediately, taking in my appearance with barely concealed disgust. I fumbled with my purse, my swollen fingers clumsy as I reached for the precious appointment ticket. But as I pulled it out, it slipped from my grasp and fluttered to the floor. "Oh no," I whispered, bending awkwardly to retrieve it. The second nurse, younger but with the same cold expression, watched me struggle without offering help. "Is this some kind of joke?" the first nurse said as I straightened up, breathing hard. She snatched the ticket from my hand and examined it with raised eyebrows. "Dr. Morrison, you have an appointment with Dr. Morrison." "Yes, I've been waiting 3 months for this slot. I have a high-risk pregnancy and—" "Listen, honey," the second nurse interrupted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This is a private hospital. Do you have any idea what Dr. Morrison charges for consultations?" Heat flushed my cheeks as other patients in the waiting area began to stare. "I saved up the money. I have insurance that covers part of it, and I—" "Look at yourself," the first nurse cut me off. "Look at these clothes. You don't belong here. This isn't some charity clinic." Before I could respond, she tore the appointment ticket in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter onto the marble floor like confetti. "There are public hospitals for people like you. Try the county facility downtown." My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. The baby kicked hard against my ribs as if sensing my distress. I stared at the torn pieces of paper scattered at my feet, pieces of hope I'd held onto for months. "Please," I said quietly, "I just need—" "You need to leave," the first nurse said firmly, "before security escorts you out." The lobby had gone completely quiet, except for the soft, classical music playing from hidden speakers. I could feel everyone watching as I slowly bent to collect the torn pieces of my appointment ticket, my dignity shredding along with it. I turned toward the exit, my vision blurred with unshed tears, when the automatic doors slid open with a soft whisper. The sound that followed was unmistakable, the deep rumble of expensive engines, too many to count. Through the glass wall, I could see them. A convoy of sleek black cars pulling up to the hospital entrance, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun like dark mirrors. The vehicles moved with military precision, forming a protective circle around the main entrance. The lobby fell into absolute silence. Car doors opened simultaneously, and men in dark suits emerged, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They weren't hospital security, these were different, dangerous. They positioned themselves at strategic points around the entrance, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Then he stepped out of the center vehicle. Even through my tears, I could see the immediate effect his presence had on everyone in the lobby. Nurses straightened. Visitors shrank back into their chairs. The 2 nurses who had humiliated me went pale, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. He was tall and imposing, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a year. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and when he moved, it was with the quiet confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. The automatic doors opened for him, and he stepped into the lobby like he owned it, which, for all I knew, he probably did. His dark eyes swept across the room, taking in everything with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing his territory. When those eyes found me standing there with tears on my cheeks and torn paper in my hands, they stopped moving. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other across the marble expanse. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, confusion. He began walking toward me with measured steps, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the silent lobby like a countdown. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and controlled, carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. "Is there a problem here?" The Mafia boss stood before me, and I could feel the entire lobby holding its breath. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming. There was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen things that would break lesser men, yet when he looked at me, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know there's no problem," I stammered, clutching the torn pieces of my appointment ticket. "I was just leaving." But his attention had already shifted to the two nurses behind the reception desk, who were now visibly trembling. When he spoke, his voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I asked if there was a problem," he repeated, not looking away from them. "And I believe there is." The older nurse tried to compose herself. "Sir, this is just a misunderstanding. The young woman didn't have proper documentation for—" "Proper documentation?" His eyebrows raised slightly, and somehow that small gesture was more threatening than any raised voice could have been. "What documentation was that?" I watched in amazement as these women who had treated me like garbage moments before now stumbled over themselves to explain. The younger nurse spoke up, her voice shaking. "She had an appointment ticket, but it wasn't. We weren't sure it was legitimate. People sometimes forge these things, and we have to protect the hospital from—" "Show me," he said simply. I looked down at the torn pieces in my hands, then slowly held them out. One of his men, a mountain of a person in an expensive suit, stepped forward and carefully collected the fragments from my palms with surprising gentleness. The Mafia boss examined the torn ticket, and I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. When he looked back at the nurses, there was something deadly in his expression. "You tore up a pregnant woman's appointment ticket," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A ticket for Dr. Morrison, who happens to be the best high-risk pregnancy specialist in the state." "We didn't know," the older nurse began. "You didn't know?" His voice remained quiet, but everyone in the lobby flinched. "You didn't know that destroying someone's medical appointment could endanger both mother and child. You didn't know that humiliating a pregnant woman in public was beneath the standards of any decent human being." I found myself staring at him in shock. This man, clearly someone dangerous enough to make an entire hospital staff freeze with fear, was defending me. But why? He turned back to me and his expression shifted again, becoming almost gentle. "When is your due date?" he asked. 8 weeks, I whispered, still not understanding what was happening. "And this appointment?" "It's my first ultrasound in months. I've been having complications, and Dr. Morrison was the only specialist who had availability, but the waiting list was so long, and I saved for months to afford." I stopped, realizing I was rambling. He was studying my face intently, as if searching for something. There was a strange expression in his eyes, part confusion, part recognition, like he was looking at a ghost. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Elena," I said. "Elena Vasquez." The moment I said my last name, something changed in his expression. His eyes widened slightly, and he took a half step closer to me. "Vasquez," he repeated slowly. "Elena Vasquez." He was silent for a long moment, and I could see him working through something in his mind. "Who was your mother?" The question caught me completely off guard. "My mother, she passed away when I was 15. Her name was Maria Vasquez, but I don't understand why." "Maria," the name left his lips like a prayer. His face had gone completely pale beneath his olive complexion. "Maria Vasquez, who worked at the St. Catherine's shelter downtown, who had dark hair and sang Spanish lullabies." My heart stopped. Nobody knew about the lullabies. My mother used to sing them to me every night, songs her own mother had taught her back in El Salvador. How could this stranger possibly know that? "How do you know about my mother?" I whispered. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes searching my face as if memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "Because 28 years ago, your mother saved my life." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, and one of his men immediately stepped forward, concerned, but the boss waved him back. "That's impossible," I said shakily. "She never mentioned. She worked at the shelter, but she never talked about." "She wouldn't have," he said quietly. "It was too dangerous, but she found me in an alley 3 blocks from St. Catherine's, bleeding out from a knife wound. 15 years old, no family, no one who would miss me. She could have walked past, should have walked past. Instead, she dragged me to safety and nursed me back to health." I was staring at him in complete shock, my mind reeling. That's why you recognized me. You have her eyes, he said simply. And her stubborn chin. I've never forgotten her face, and I see it every time I look at you. The lobby around us had faded away. The nurses, the other patients, even his own men, nothing existed except this impossible connection to my mother. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? He asked again, and this time I understood the weight behind those words. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely audible. Tell you I was coming. I've never seen you before in my life. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, there was a mixture of pain and regret that caught me completely off guard. Your mother made me promise something, he said quietly. Before I left the shelter, before I became what I am now, she made me swear that if her daughter ever needed help, any kind of help, I would be there. My legs felt weak, and I realized I was swaying slightly. The baby was moving restlessly inside me, as if picking up on my emotional turmoil. But she never told me about you, I whispered. She never mentioned saving anyone, never said anything about promises. Of course she didn't, his expression softened. Maria was protecting you, the path I chose after leaving that shelter. It wasn't safe to be connected to me. She was smart to keep her distance. One of his men approached quietly and whispered something in his ear. The boss nodded without taking his eyes off me. Dr. Morrison is in surgery until 3 o'clock, he said, but he'll see you immediately afterward. My people are arranging it now. I can't afford. It's handled. His voice brooked no argument. The question is, why are you here alone? Where is the father? The question hit harder than I expected, and I felt fresh tears threatening. He left when he found out I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. Something dark flashed across the boss's features, and I noticed his hands clench slightly at his sides. What about other family, friends? My mother was all I had. After she died, I aged out of the foster system. I've been on my own since I was 18. I wiped at my eyes with the back of my hand. I clean offices at night to pay rent. It's the only work I could find that would let me bring the baby afterward. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Your mother, he said slowly, did she ever tell you why she came to work at the shelter? I frowned, confused by the change of subject. She said she wanted to help people who had nowhere else to go. She understood what it felt like to be alone. She understood, he repeated, because she had been alone, but do you know why? Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? He exchanged a glance with one of his men, who nodded slightly and stepped back to give us more privacy. Elena, your mother didn't just work at the shelter. She lived there. She was a resident when I met her. The words didn't make sense at first. That's not possible. She had an apartment. We lived together until she died. After, he said gently, she got the apartment after. I made sure of it. My world tilted on its axis. What are you saying? I'm saying that the promise I made to your mother wasn't just about being there if you needed help. It was about making sure you had the life she never got to have. A real home, security, safety. I stared at him in growing horror. You've been watching me. Watching over you, he corrected. There's a difference. The scholarship that got you through high school when your grades were slipping after Maria's death. That was me. The rent subsidy that kept you from getting evicted 3 years ago when you got sick and couldn't work for 2 months. Me. The job cleaning those offices. The building manager was persuaded to give you flexible hours. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, every struggle I thought I'd overcome on my own. Why, I whispered, why would you do all that? His expression became distant, lost in memory. Because your mother saw something in me that no one else had ever seen. When she found me in that alley, I was a street kid with nothing to lose and everything to hate. I was angry, violent, ready to die before I turned 16. He paused, his eyes focusing on something beyond the hospital walls. She sat with me for 3 weeks while I recovered, fed me soup and told me stories and sang those lullabies when the nightmares got too bad. But more than that, she talked to me, really talked to me, asked about my dreams, my fears, what I wanted to become. And what did you tell her? I found myself asking. I told her I wanted to matter. I wanted to build something that would last, something that would protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She said that was a worthy goal, but I had to be careful not to lose myself in the process. The irony of his words hung heavy in the air. This man who commanded fear from everyone around him, who had built an empire through methods I could only imagine, talking about not losing himself. "Did you," I asked quietly, "lose yourself?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "I became very good at protecting people," he said finally, "but I forgot how to let people protect me. Your mother was the last person who ever saw me as just human." That's when I understood. The promise he'd made to my mother wasn't just about taking care of me. It was about holding on to the last piece of the person he used to be. "She never knew, did she?" I asked, "what you became?" "No, she died believing I'd made something good of my life." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe she was right. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more, I'd really appreciate your support. I'm still working hard to create better and more emotional stories for you, and joining Patreon is one of the best ways you can support my work. The full exclusive content is waiting for you there." A soft chime from his phone broke the heavy silence between us. He glanced at it, his expression immediately shifting back to business mode. "Dr. Morrison is ready for you," he said. "Room 412, private wing." "I should go," I said, but my feet remained rooted to the spot. Everything had changed in the span of 20 minutes, and I felt completely unmoored. "Elena," his voice stopped me as I started to turn away. "After your appointment, there's something else we need to discuss." Something in his tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. What kind of something? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. This time, when he read the message, his entire posture changed. The careful composure he'd maintained throughout our conversation cracked slightly. "Sir," one of his men approached cautiously, "is there a problem?" The boss's jaw tightened as he typed a quick response. "Marcus found something," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the phone screen, "about Elena's father." My blood ran cold. "My father? What does my father have to do with anything? I've never even met him." His dark eyes met mine, and I saw reluctance there, as if he was debating how much to tell me. "Your mother never told you his name. She said it didn't matter, that he was gone before I was born and would never be part of our lives." I felt defensive suddenly, the way I always did when the subject of my absent father came up. "Why? What did you find?" Another message came through, and this time I watched the color drain from his face completely. "We need to go upstairs now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Dr. Morrison can wait." "What? No, I've been waiting months for this appointment." "Elena," he grabbed my arm gently but firmly. "Your father isn't some random man who disappeared before you were born. He's been looking for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible." "And he's not just anyone." His grip on my arm tightened slightly. "He's Antonio Marchetti, head of the Marchetti crime family, my biggest rival." The world seemed to spin around me. The elegant hospital lobby, the concerned faces of his men, the distant sound of medical equipment, everything blurred together as his words sank in. "No," I whispered, "that can't be right." But even as I said it, pieces were clicking into place. My mother's refusal to ever discuss my father. Her insistence that we move apartments every few years. The way she sometimes looked over her shoulder when we walked down the street as if she was afraid of being followed. "Dr. Morrison can examine you in my private medical facility," the boss said, already signaling to his men. "It's not safe for you here anymore." "Wait, slow down," I said, my mind reeling. "If this Marchetti person is my father and he's been looking for me, why haven't I ever heard from him?" "Because your mother made sure you stayed hidden." His expression was grim. "And because until today I made sure of it too." That stopped me cold. "You knew, all these years you knew who my father was and you kept me from him." "I kept you safe from him," he corrected. "There's a difference." Anger flared in my chest, hot and sudden. "That wasn't your decision to make. You had no right." "I had every right." His voice cut through my protest like steel. "Because I knew what kind of man Antonio Marchetti is. I knew what happens to people in his family. I knew what happened to his last girlfriend who got pregnant." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and I felt the baby kick hard against my ribs, as if responding to my sudden spike of fear. "What happened to her?" I asked quietly. "She disappeared, along with the child." His eyes never left my face. Officially, it was a car accident. Unofficially, Antonio decided he didn't want the complication of a family. I pressed my hand to my stomach protectively. But if he's been looking for me, he's been looking for you because he needs you now. His organization is under pressure. Federal investigations, rival families moving against him. A lost daughter suddenly becomes a useful asset. My legs felt weak, and I sank into one of the leather chairs in the lobby. The two nurses who had started this whole nightmare were nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the back office. "This is insane," I said, staring at my hands. "An hour ago, my biggest problem was affording a doctor's appointment. Now you're telling me my father is some crime boss who might want to kill me." The Mafia boss crouched down in front of my chair, bringing himself to my eye level. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than I'd heard it yet. "Elena, I want you to understand something. The promise I made to your mother was sacred to me. Everything I've done for the past 15 years has been about keeping you safe. But now that Antonio knows you exist—" "How does he know I exist?" I interrupted. His jaw tightened. "Because I made a mistake. 3 months ago, I had my people check on you like they do every few months. But this time, someone was watching. One of Marchetti's men spotted the surveillance." The weight of what he was saying settled over me like a blanket of ice. "So this is your fault?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "It's my fault, and I'm going to fix it." "How?" He stood up, his expression hardening back into the dangerous mask I'd first seen. "By making sure Antonio Marchetti never gets the chance to use you as a pawn in his games." Something in his tone made my blood chill. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes," he said simply. "But first we need to get you and your baby somewhere safe." As if summoned by his words, 3 more black cars pulled up outside the hospital, their occupants moving with the same coordinated precision as his men. "Those aren't my people," he said quietly, his hand moving to something inside his jacket. Through the glass wall, I could see men getting out of the cars. They looked exactly like his men, expensive suits, professional bearing, dangerous eyes. But the tension rolling off the boss told me everything I needed to know. "He found us," I whispered. "He found you," he corrected. "Which means the games are about to begin." The hospital lobby erupted into controlled chaos as both sets of men positioned themselves strategically. I watched in terrified fascination as what had been a peaceful medical facility transformed into a potential battlefield, with me as the unwitting prize. "Stay close to me," the boss said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "No matter what happens, don't leave my side." Through the glass wall, I could see a man emerging from the center vehicle of the new convoy. Even from a distance, I could tell he commanded the same kind of respect and fear as the man beside me. But where the boss carried himself with controlled intensity, this man, my father, moved with predatory confidence. "Is that him?" I whispered. "Antonio Marchetti," he confirmed. "Your father." As the man approached the hospital entrance, I found myself studying his face with desperate curiosity. Was there anything familiar about him? Any genetic echo that would explain the hollow place my mother had never let me examine? He was shorter than the boss, but broader, with graying hair and expensive clothes that spoke of old money and older violence. When the automatic doors opened for him, his dark eyes immediately found mine across the lobby, and I saw something flicker there: recognition, satisfaction, and something else I couldn't identify. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent as he approached. "My daughter." The words should have meant something, should have stirred some deep emotional response. Instead, I felt only confusion and growing fear. "Mr. Marchetti," the boss said, stepping slightly in front of me, "this is neutral ground." "Neutral ground?" Antonio laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "You've been keeping my daughter from me for 28 years, and you think there's such a thing as neutral ground between us." "I've been keeping her safe," the boss replied evenly, "as I promised her mother I would." "Her mother?" Antonio's expression darkened. "Maria, sweet Maria, who thought she could hide from me forever." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean, hide from you?" Antonio's attention shifted to me, and I saw something possessive in his gaze that made my skin crawl. "Didn't your mother tell you about us, Mija? How we met, how much I loved her?" The endearment sounded wrong coming from his lips, forced and unfamiliar. I shook my head, pressing closer to the boss despite barely knowing him. She told me my father left before I was born, I said quietly. Left, Antonio's voice rose slightly. I didn't leave. She ran, disappeared in the middle of the night with my child without giving me a chance to. To what? The boss interrupted, his voice sharp. To control her the way you controlled Teresa, to make her disappear when she became inconvenient. Teresa was different, Antonio snapped. She was weak. She would have been a liability to my family. And Maria was, he paused, his expression softening in a way that somehow made him more frightening, not less. Maria was special, perfect for raising my heir. The casual way he said it, as if my mother had been nothing more than breeding stock, made me feel sick. I'm not your heir, I said, finding my voice. I'm not part of your family. I want nothing from you. Antonio smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd seen yet. Oh, but you are part of my family, Alina, whether you want to be or not. Blood doesn't lie. Neither does choice, the boss said firmly, and she's chosen. Has she? Antonio's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Alina, sweetheart, do you know what your protector here does for a living? Do you know how many people he's killed to build his empire? I felt the boss tense beside me, but he didn't deny it. Do you know, Antonio continued, that he's been controlling your entire life? Every job, every apartment, every decision you thought you were making on your own. My breath caught. The boss had told me about the scholarship, the rent help, the job, but hearing it laid out like this, as manipulation rather than protection, made it sound different, made it sound like another kind of prison. At least he didn't abandon me, I said, but my voice shook slightly. Abandon you? Antonio laughed again. Alina, I've been looking for you since the day you were born. I hired investigators, contacted police departments, followed every lead. Your mother was very good at hiding, I'll give her that. But I never stopped looking for my daughter. I wanted to dismiss his words, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was telling the truth. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, and I winced. When is the baby due? Antonio asked, his voice suddenly gentle. That's none of your business, the boss said before I could answer. Everything about my daughter is my business, Antonio replied, his tone hardening. Including the child she's carrying, my grandchild. No, I said firmly, this baby has nothing to do with you. Blood doesn't lie, he repeated. And family protects family. I can give you things he never could, security, legacy, a future for your child that doesn't depend on the whims of strangers. I looked between the two men, both powerful, both dangerous, both claiming to want what was best for me, but neither had asked what I wanted. I want to leave, I said quietly. I want to take my baby and leave, and I don't want either of you following me. Both men stared at me, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Alina, the boss said carefully, that's not possible anymore, now that Antonio knows about you. Now that I know about her, Antonio interrupted, she's under my protection, whether she likes it or not. The words hung in the air like a threat, and I realized with growing horror that neither of these men intended to let me walk away. I was a prize to be won, a pawn to be moved, a daughter to be claimed, but not a person to be respected. What if I go to the police? I asked desperately. Both men looked at each other, and for a moment their rivalry was replaced by shared amusement. The police, the boss said gently, can't protect you from him, and they can't protect you from me if it comes to that. But it won't come to that, Antonio said smoothly, because you're going to come home with me, Alina, where you belong. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of their expectations and the casual certainty that my choices didn't matter. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and suddenly I knew what I had to do. I need to use the bathroom, I said. Both men looked at me suspiciously. I'm 7 months pregnant, I said pointedly, unless you want me to have an accident right here on your expensive marble floor. The boss nodded to one of his men. Escort her, stay outside the door. As I walked toward the restroom, my mind raced. I had maybe 5 minutes before they started wondering what was taking so long. 5 minutes to figure out how to escape two of the most powerful criminals in the city. 5 minutes to save my baby from becoming the next generation's pawn in their deadly games. The bathroom was empty except for the soft hum of ventilation and my own ragged breathing. I locked the door and immediately started looking for another way out. There had to be a window, a service exit, something. But as I examined the sterile white walls, I realized the futility of my situation. Even if I could escape this bathroom, where would I go? How far could a 7 months pregnant woman get before two criminal organizations found her? I sank onto the small bench by the sinks and buried my face in my hands. The baby was moving restlessly, as if sensing my panic. I placed my hands on my belly and tried to calm both of us down. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this mess." That's when I heard it, a soft knock on the door, followed by a woman's voice. "Elena, it's Dr. Morrison. May I come in?" I froze. How had the doctor found me here? And how did she know my name? "I know you're frightened," the voice continued. "But I need to examine you. The baby's heart rate is showing some irregularities on our monitoring system." Monitoring system? I looked around the bathroom again and spotted it. A small medical alert device mounted near the ceiling, probably designed to detect medical emergencies in the hospital's public areas. I unlocked the door and found myself face to face with a woman in her 50s, wearing scrubs and a white coat. Her expression was kind but concerned. "I'm Dr. Morrison," she said, "and you're in labor." "What? No, I can't be. It's too early." "Stress can trigger premature labor," she said gently, helping me to my feet. "How long have you been having contractions?" I realized with growing horror that what I'd thought was the baby kicking had been something else entirely. The tightening sensation in my belly, the restlessness, the discomfort. "We need to get you to the maternity ward immediately," Dr. Morrison said. "But the men outside are about to become fathers whether they like it or not," she said firmly. "And right now, the only thing that matters is you and this baby." She helped me out of the bathroom, where both the boss and Antonio immediately noticed my pale, shaky condition. "What's wrong?" the boss demanded. "She's in labor," Dr. Morrison announced. "We need to move now." The effect of her words was instantaneous. All the posturing, all the territorial disputes, all the power games, everything stopped as both men realized that the situation had suddenly become about life and death rather than pride and possession. "How long?" Antonio asked, his voice tight with concern. "Hard to say with premature labor," Dr. Morrison replied, already guiding me toward the elevator. "Could be hours, could be minutes." I found myself supported between the two most dangerous men in the city as we rode the elevator to the maternity ward. The absurdity of the situation might have been funny if I hadn't been doubled over with another contraction. "This is happening too fast," I gasped. "Sometimes babies have their own timeline," Dr. Morrison said calmly. "The important thing is that you're in the best possible place for this." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, worried faces, and pain that made everything else seem insignificant. Both men insisted on staying close, despite the nurses' protests. I was too exhausted and frightened to argue with them. Somewhere between the epidural and the final push, I realized that none of the politics mattered anymore. The boss's promises, Antonio's claims, my own fears about the future, all of it faded away in the face of the most important thing that had ever happened to me. When my daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming with healthy indignation, the room fell completely silent. Dr. Morrison placed her on my chest, and I stared down at this miraculous little person who had chosen this moment, this chaotic day, to make her entrance into the world. "She's beautiful," the boss said quietly from somewhere behind me. "She's perfect," Antonio added, his voice thick with emotion. I looked up at both of them, these powerful, dangerous men who had been ready to go to war over me, and I saw something I hadn't expected: tears. "Her name is Maria," I said firmly, "after my mother." Both men nodded, accepting this without argument. "Elena," the boss said carefully, "about what happens next." "What happens next," I interrupted, "is that I raise my daughter, alone, away from all of this." "That's not realistic," Antonio began. "It's what's going to happen," I said with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Both of you can be part of her life, but only on my terms. No games, no manipulation, no using her as a pawn in your war." I looked directly at the boss. "You saved my life by keeping me away from him, but you also stole my choices. I won't let that happen to her." Then I turned to Antonio. "And you? If you want to be her grandfather, you need to prove that you can put her welfare before your own ambitions." The room was quiet except for little Maria's soft breathing, and the steady beep of medical equipment. "How do we do that?" the boss asked finally. "By calling a truce," I said simply. "By agreeing that her nursery is neutral territory, by promising me that she'll grow up knowing both of you but not knowing fear." It was an impossible request, asking two rival crime bosses to put aside years of conflict for the sake of a baby. But as I looked down at Maria's tiny face, I realized that impossible things had already been happening all day. Antonio was the first to speak. "I agree to your terms." The boss nodded slowly, "As do I." "And if either of you breaks this agreement," I continued, "you'll lose her forever. I'll disappear so completely that even you won't be able to find us." Both men looked at me with newfound respect, perhaps finally understanding that becoming a mother had transformed me into someone just as fierce as they were. 3 months later, I watch from my kitchen window as the boss teaches Maria to grip his finger while Antonio reads her a Spanish lullaby, the same kind my mother used to sing to me. They're still dangerous men living dangerous lives, but in this small apartment that neither of them could have prevented my mother from finding, they've learned to be grandfathers first. My mother's promise to help a wounded boy in an alley had rippled forward through decades, ultimately creating this strange, imperfect family. And Maria, named for the woman who started it all, would grow up knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show kindness to someone who doesn't deserve it. Because blood doesn't lie, but love is stronger than blood. And in the end, love was what had brought us all home. Thank you for staying until the end and supporting my stories. It truly means a lot to me. If you'd like to support me and help me continue creating more stories like this, please consider joining my Patreon. Your support helps me keep this project going, and there's exclusive content waiting for you there.